Rafael Nadal handed Alexandra Eala something no Grand Slam trophy, no ranking milestone, no championship ceremony could ever replicate. And it reduced the toughest young competitor in women's tennis to absolute, uncontrollable tears. A gift so personal, so loaded with 7 years of sacrifice and silence, that the moment it happened, the entire tennis world stopped scrolling and started weeping alongside her. This wasn't just a gesture. This was a legend transferring his soul, his entire legacy, into the hands of a 20-year-old girl from the Philippines who dared to believe when nobody else did. Stay right here, because what unfolded between Rafa Nadal and Alex Eala is the most emotionally devastating, breathtakingly beautiful story tennis has produced in years. And by the time this ends, you will understand exactly why millions of fans across the globe broke down crying the second they watched it. There is a specific kind of courage that only a child understands, not the calculated bravery of an adult weighing options, measuring risks, building contingency plans, but the raw, terrifying, wholehearted leap of a 12-year-old who looks at a dream so enormous it swallows the horizon and jumps anyway. That is precisely what Alexandra Eala did. Born in Quezon City, Philippines, in a country where basketball bleeds through the streets and tennis barely registers as a footnote in the national conversation, young Alex Eala picked up a racket and decided that she would one day compete among the greatest women on earth. Not hope, not wish, decide. At 12 years old, she packed her bags, boarded a plane, and landed in Manacor, Spain, the birthplace of Rafael Nadal himself, to train at the Rafa Nadal Academy. Let that sink in for a moment. 12 years old, thousands of miles from home, from her language, from the warmth of a Filipino kitchen, from her mother's voice through the walls at night. She traded all of it for clay courts, brutal training schedules, and the relentless pursuit of becoming something the Philippines had never seen before. The academy itself operates on Nadal's personal philosophy that greatness is not gifted, it is forged. Every drill, every sweat-soaked afternoon, every moment of doubt is treated as construction material for a champion. For young Eala, those walls in Manacor became her classroom, her sanctuary, her second skin. "I've been there for about 7 years," she would later say, after shocking the tennis world at the 2025 Miami Open. "It's my second home, and I have so many outstanding relationships with the people there. They've helped me in my development an astronomical amount." 7 years. Think about what 7 years means at 20 years old. It means more than a third of her entire life was shaped by that red clay, those Spanish mornings, that singular vision carved into her by an institution built around the ethos of one sport's most decorated warriors. She won the 2022 U.S. Open girls singles title before even turning professional. She graduated the academy in 2023, and then she was unleashed onto the WTA Tour, raw, hungry, and carrying a nation's wildest tennis dream on her shoulders. But nobody, absolutely nobody, could have predicted what 2025 would bring. The Miami Open happened like a lightning bolt striking twice in the same afternoon. Eala, entering as a wild card, dismantled former Roland Garros champion Jelena Ostapenko. Then she stared down Madison, a massive, powerful Australian Open champion, and walked off court with a 6-4, 6-2 demolition that left commentary booths speechless. Then came Iga Swiatek, the world #1, the most dominant clay court force of her generation. Gone, beaten, sent home by a 20-year-old from Quezon City. She became the first Filipino player in the Open era to defeat a top 10 opponent, the first Filipina to reach a 1,000 semifinal, the highest-ranked Filipino in the entire history of the WTA Tour. History wasn't just made, it was shattered into pieces and reassembled into something that looked unmistakably like destiny. But through all of it, through every triumph, every teary press conference, every Filipino flag waved and packed stadiums, one relationship remained quietly at the center of everything.
One name kept appearing. One presence kept watching from a distance, sending messages, posting emojis, choosing his moments carefully. Rafael Nadal. And he was building towards something private, something the world hadn't seen yet. Still here? Good, because what happens next is the part nobody expected. There are wins that change rankings, and then there are moments that change lives. When Alexandra Eala walked off the court at the Miami Open, having just dismantled Iga Swiatek, her phone began filling with congratulations from across the globe. Teammates, coaches, Filipino officials, journalists, fans, an avalanche of admiration pouring in from every direction. In the chaotic, electric aftermath of the most seismic result of her young career, one notification sat quietly among hundreds of others. Unread, waiting. It was from Rafael Nadal, and it was the first time he had ever messaged her personally. "Rafa messaged me," Eala revealed in a candid interview with her uncle, Noli Eala, on Power and Play. "It was the first time he ever messaged me personally, so that was a shock to see. Funny story, I only saw it a couple of days later. It was exciting to see his notification." Only saw it days later. Read that again. The man who won 22 Grand Slams, the man whose academy shaped her childhood, the man she called her idol, the person whose relentless grounding, despite incomprehensible achievement she openly admired. He is so grounded, and he has achieved more than anything I could dream of, and the fact that he is still so nice to everyone around here is very admirable from him. That man reached into his private world and sent her a personal message, and amid the beautiful chaos of her breakthrough, she almost missed it entirely. When she finally read it, those close to her described the moment as one where composure simply evaporated. This wasn't just affirmation from a coach. This wasn't praise from a sponsor or a federation. This was Rafa, her idol, someone who had built his career on the same obsessive dedication, the same willingness to suffer beautifully that Eala had inherited by breathing the same academy air for 7 formative years. His words carried the weight of 22 majors and a lifetime of hard-won wisdom. Shortly after, the world watching from the outside received only fragments: a congratulatory Instagram story, a tweet celebrating her victory. Nadal posted, "Congratulations, Alex. What a great win for you and for the Philippines." He shared a celebratory applause emoji on his Instagram story. Simple gestures to the public, but behind closed doors, the private message carried something far more intimate, an acknowledgement from mentor to protégé that said, without needing elaborate language, "I see you. I always saw you." And when Eala reached her first WTA final at Eastbourne later that year, collapsing emotionally as she accepted the runners-up trophy, tears streaming openly as she declared, "It's my first WTA final. It's a big deal for me and for my country because it's historic. It's the first time any Filipina has done anything like this. I guess that's also why I'm so emotional." Nadal was among the first to respond publicly. "The first final of many finals at Alex05, he wrote. Every message, every emoji, every public declaration, each one was laying a foundation. And then came November 19th, 2025, the anniversary of retirement, exactly 1 year since Rafael Nadal played his final professional match at the Davis Cup Finals in Malaga. 1 year of silence, 1 year away from the courts that defined him. And on that precise, symbolic date, he chose to return. Not for a press event, not for an exhibition broadcast to millions. He chose to return for her. November 19th, 2025, exactly 12 months after Rafael Nadal's final professional heartbeat echoed through the court in Malaga, he laced up his shoes, gripped his racket, and walked back onto a tennis court at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor. Waiting on the opposite side of the net? Alexandra Eala. The symbolism of that moment is almost too heavy to carry in words. This was a man who had spent an entire year away, processing retirement, adjusting to a post-competitive identity, quietly grieving the sport that consumed him completely. 22 Grand Slams, 92 titles, 209 weeks ranked #1 in the world, a career so monumental that its conclusion left a crater in the global sports landscape. And his first step back onto the surface he loved, He gave it to her. 1 year later, it felt great to be back on a tennis court. It was great to practice with you, Alex. Next time, I will be stronger. The wink emoji. Casual. Warm. Quintessentially Rafa. But Eala's response underneath said everything in 4 words that carried an entire universe of emotion. Back like you never left. 4 words from a young woman who spent 7 years watching this man's philosophy permeate every corner of her development. 4 words that acknowledged his greatness without diminishing the intimacy of what just occurred. 4 words that made a watching world reach collectively for tissues. The footage spread across social media with volcanic velocity. Nadal's Instagram reel reached his 14 million followers on X within hours. Tennis fans, Filipino supporters, sports media, everybody stopped and stared at this image of a retired legend returning to the game exclusively to invest in the future of his most treasured pupil. But what made the social media reaction truly extraordinary wasn't the sentimentality, it was the timing. November 19th. That date wasn't accidental. Nadal didn't randomly decide to pick up a racket on any given afternoon. He chose the 1-year anniversary of his retirement on the courts that carry his name, with the young woman whose entire career is the most living, breathing evidence that his academy, his philosophy, his legacy continues conquering long after he stopped playing. When the Rafa Nadal Academy shared a follow-up video of Eala speaking about the session, she described receiving specific technical guidance on her forehand ahead of 2026. Precise. Practical. The work of a mentor still deeply invested in the outcome of a student's story. This was the golden key moment, not a physical object, but something infinitely more valuable: access. Access to his presence again, access to his knowledge, access to the version of Rafa that never belonged to press conferences or sponsorship campaigns, but only to the courts, the craft, and the few people he trusted completely. And when the video surfaced, when the tennis world saw it clearly, the emotional response was unlike anything the sport had witnessed in years. Think this was the peak of the emotion? You haven't heard the part that broke everyone completely. Keep watching.
To understand why this moment fractured composure across an entire generation of tennis fans, you need to understand what the Rafa Nadal Academy actually represents to Alexandra Eala. Not as an institution, not as a brand or a facility or a training program, but as an identity. She arrived at 12. She departed at 19. Those 7 years in Manacor didn't just develop her forehand or sharpen her footwork. They constructed who she is as a competitor, as a professional, as a human being navigating a world that wasn't built with a Filipina tennis player in mind. Every value she carries on court, the relentless grinding, the refusal to surrender, the almost spiritual commitment to staying present regardless of the scoreline, those are direct transmissions from the Nadal philosophy, absorbed through years of proximity to greatness. He is so grounded, she told GMA back in 2020. He has achieved more than anything I could dream of, and the fact that he is still so nice to everyone around here is very admirable. Admirable. She used that word specifically. Not impressive, not incredible. Admirable. Because what Eala recognized at an age when most teenagers are barely comprehending their own ambitions was that Nadal's most extraordinary achievement wasn't the trophies, it was the character he maintained while collecting them. That is the golden key in its truest form. Not the practice session alone, not the forehand tips or the technical refinement. The key Nadal handed Eala across 7 years, across personal messages, across public declarations of pride, across the anniversary return, was the permission to believe that her version of tennis greatness was legitimate, that a girl from the Philippines, carrying 0 historical precedent in her country's tennis narrative, belonged at the absolute summit of this sport. When she stood at Eastbourne holding a runners-up trophy, weeping openly, and said, "It's the first time any Filipina has done anything like this," That emotion wasn't just about the final she'd lost. It was the cumulative weight of every moment someone, somewhere, quietly doubted whether she deserved to stand in those arenas. And Nadal's consistent, vocal, deeply personal investment in her journey was the counter-argument to every whisper of doubt. His Instagram heart eyes emojis reacting to her social posts ahead of the Macau Tennis Masters, his first ever private message after Miami, his first final of many finals public declaration, his return to court on the most symbolic date possible, choosing her as his practice partner. Every single one of those moments was Nadal saying, "You are not just my student. You are proof that what I built matters." And when Filipino fans, millions of them, watching from a nation that had waited generations for a tennis champion to call their own, witnessed all of it converging in that November practice session footage, something broke open beautifully. Parents shared it with children, teenagers sent it to grandparents. It traveled beyond sports entirely and landed somewhere in the universal human conversation about mentorship, inheritance, and what it means to be genuinely believed in by someone who has nothing to gain from lying. The tears weren't just Eala's. They belonged to everyone who ever chased something enormous and needed someone else's faith to survive the distance. Within 48 hours of Nadal sharing the practice session footage, the internet did what it does best when confronted with something undeniably purely beautiful. It amplified everything. Tennis Twitter erupted. Clips circulated across Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube with captions that ranged from deeply personal testimonies to straightforward declarations of admiration. Former players commented. Current WTA competitors reacted. Sports journalists who rarely acknowledge emotional dimensions of athlete relationships paused their usual analytical rhythm and simply acknowledged the weight of what had occurred. "Back like you never left" was Eala's response on Instagram, and those 4 words inspired hundreds of thousands of fan posts, stitching her reply to photographs of Nadal's greatest victories, his most painful defeats, his most vulnerable press conference confessions. Fans constructed timelines contrasting Nadal's retirement match against Botic van de Zandschulp in Malaga with his return on the academy courts alongside Eala, painting the visual argument that every ending in sport contains the seed of someone else's beginning. Filipino sports media reached a collective fever pitch. Television programs dedicated entire segments to the relationship between Nadal and Eala. National athletes from outside tennis publicly celebrated the moment. The historic 2025 Miami Open, where Eala became the highest-ranked Filipina in WTA Tour history, suddenly felt inseparable from this narrative because the practice session revealed that behind every public triumph was a private mentorship operating on a frequency most people never access. Eala had already made history as the first Filipina to win a WTA singles title, break into the top 100 globally, and reach a WTA 1000 semifinal, finishing the 2025 season at a career high ranking of number 50 in the world. But somehow, this moment, quieter than any of those stadium victories, smaller in official significance than any ranking milestone, struck deeper than all of them combined. Because rankings measure performance, this measured something immeasurable. Coaches from across the tennis development community began publicly discussing Nadal's model of mentorship, how rarely legends stay emotionally invested in the careers of those they trained once professional competition ends. Nadal, evidently, was operating on a completely different principle. His academy in Manacor was not a legacy monument. It was a living system he refused to abandon simply because his playing career concluded. 1 year later, it felt great to be back on a tennis court. "It was great to practice with you, Alex," Eala. Straightforward language from a man who has never needed elaborate vocabulary to communicate depth. And then the wink, the playful acknowledgement that even retired legends measure themselves against rising stars and find the competition motivating. The worldwide reaction accumulated around one central, unspoken recognition. This is what mentorship is supposed to look like. Not transactional, not institutional, not limited to the duration of formal enrollment, but continuous, personal, invested, and alive, stretching across retirement and geography and the distance between legend and protégé, because a genuine belief in someone else's potential doesn't carry an expiration date. You've reached the moment everything comes together. This final chapter is the one that will stay with you long after the video ends. Here is the question that lingers after all the footage fades, after the social media storms settle, after the tears dry and the headlines move to the next story. What does it mean to receive a golden key from Rafael Nadal? It means you have been deemed worthy of carrying something forward. Not a trophy, not a technique, something far more rare, a philosophy of competing that Nadal spent his entire career embodying, that talent without suffering means nothing, that greatness without humility is hollow, and that every single point in every match deserves the full weight of your presence. Alexandra Eala absorbed that philosophy during 7 years of formation in Manicure. She demonstrated it when she entered Miami 2025 as a wildcard and refused to flinch against Keys, Swiatek, or Ostapenko. She displayed it when she stood at Eastbourne weeping openly, not hiding vulnerability, but wearing it as evidence that the moment mattered, that she was present, completely and totally, for the enormity of what she had accomplished. It's the first WTA final. It's a big deal for me and my country because it's historic. I guess that's also why I'm so emotional. And Nadal responded precisely as a mentor carrying genuine investment would respond. The first final of many finals at Alex Eala. Not consolation, projection, faith, a refusal to allow one loss to define a trajectory he already understands is pointed at something extraordinary. The November practice session wasn't a goodbye or ceremonial farewell between eras. It was a continuation. Nadal returning to the court specifically to refine her forehand ahead of 2026 communicates something unmistakable, that his involvement in her development is active, not archival, that the academy bearing his name is not a monument to what he achieved, but an instrument for what others will achieve through what he built. Currently ranked 50th in the world as 2025 concluded, Eala enters 2026 not merely as a promising young talent, but as a confirmed disruptor, someone who has already proven capable of dismantling the sport's most dominant names on the biggest stages. The Australian Open main draw awaits her for the first time ever. The clay season that carved Nadal's legend awaits her hungry feet. The entire second chapter of her career is standing at the doorway, and she is walking through it with the blessing of the greatest clay court champion tennis has ever produced. What Nadal gifted Alexandra Eala was not a key to a building, or a commemorative award, or a framed photograph. He gifted her continued belief during the exact stretch of her career where doubt is most dangerous, where a young player transitions